We're on. Things are being recorded now, so don't say anything bad. All right, cool. Hey, guys, today with us we've got Dustin Mendenhall. He's a old friend, client, business partner, all the things. So welcome, Dustin.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on today.
Appreciate it.
Definitely, man. So let's just jump in, let you kind of introduce yourself. Who is Dustin Mendenhall? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I think when it seems like a kind of typical interview question, right? That you walk into an interview and they say, hey, tell me about yourself, right? Uh-huh. And I think when describing yourself, I think the kind of got to start with family first. Who are you first as a husband, father, friend, uncle? You kind of go through the list of all those roles that you play with the family, and so I think that's who I am first and foremost, and then and then secondary to that is it takes. We all got to make a living, and so I'm a financial advisor out there doing my thing in the world, helping one client at a time out, and so yeah, I'm a family first always, and then job second, but both obviously take up pretty much 99% of my time. So always trying to expand upon that, but those are kind of the core things that make up who I am for sure.
That's awesome, man. So I want to jump to your family here in a second, but financial advisor, before I forget this question, there's a ton of different types of financial advisors, right? And if you go into a room and say, who's a financial advisor? Half the room's going to raise their hand, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're really a financial advisor. So explain what it is you do and what kind of separates those different capacities as a financial advisor.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that the aspect of what actually is a financial advisor has evolved even over my career, which has spanned at about a little over 11 years at this point. Mm-hmm. And every year that goes by, it seems to be becoming more and more clear for people. But initially, everybody from someone who just does insurance, insurance only type of agent would call themselves a financial advisor.
Life insurance, right?
Life insurance. Mm-hmm. Anybody that did anything like buying and selling of mutual funds for clients, and that's it. That's all they did. Some people, so your moms, dads, grandparents might consider those people brokers. Mm-hmm. Would be called financial advisors. And then, as time has gone on, we've evolved into this thing where kind of the big term out there is fiduciary. Yeah. And so everybody's told to look for a fiduciary, but nobody really knows what fiduciary exactly is or what it means or what makes you one.
It's a big word.
Yeah, it's just a big word. And so I spent a lot of time explaining that to folks, but, the essence of what I do in a fiduciary aspect is I have to do what's always right by the client. Mm-hmm. Now, the SEC has particular rules around what a fiduciary is and if you can call yourself one and whatnot. But really at the end of the day, it just boils down to the fact that from an SEC standpoint, you're not charging commissions, so nothing that you sell or provide is commission based. Mm-hmm. So everything is advice based. Okay. So when you manage money for folks, it's more on an annual type of fee as opposed to a transactional type of basis. Mm-hmm. So for me, first and foremost, it just comes down to management of assets or secondary to what we do, and then primarily really focusing on your plan. Best way I can describe it to people as far as what I actually do is I tell people, hey, as you go through your life, you've got all these puzzle pieces that you acquire that make up your life, and my job is to take all those puzzle pieces, put them together, see what the picture looks like. Either it's going to be a picture you really like, or it's going to be one you're like, yeah, maybe missing a few pieces, or I don't like the way it's starting to look. And my job is to start moving those puzzle pieces around or adding to or taking away to really get a picture that you like that's going to make up your future. Yeah. And so that's my job is to really focus on that.
That's awesome. So as a financial advisor, sorry, there's dead air here. I'm trying to think through my question. How have you grown your business? Because you kind of do it a little differently than other financial advisors do. A lot of people go out, they're networking, pounding the pavement, cold calling. How have you grown your business, and what has kind of made that different from the traditional avenue of growing it?
Yeah, so I've done it the hard way first, which was literally walking, knocking on doors, knocked on hundreds of doors a day, trying to pick up business from folks. And people always ask me, does that really work? and tell them
Edward
it
Jones, right?
did. Yeah, it did work. For the time I was there, and life took me in a different direction than there, and made a small stop at a very small, what's known as RIA. RIAs are those firms that do the fee-only type of arrangement. And so I did that, but then I got into my current role, and I've been here for a little over 7 years of that 11 or so that I've been doing it. And over those 7 years, what I've done is I've worked directly with CPA firms. Mm-hmm. And so the firm that I work with, we work directly with those. We partner with them. And so kind of think of it as the CPA firm decides that they want wealth management as a part of their core business. Mm-hmm. And so my job is to go in and be that financial advisor, or we call it a financial planning consultant for that CPA firm. Mm-hmm. And so it's a good relationship for them because they don't have to go in and hire their own advisor, figure out all the back office stuff. It's more of a turnkey approach for them. And so they kind of get the revenue from it without the headaches of everything else. Yeah. And so we take on that role. And so I'm responsible for that role in many CPA firms around the country.
Mm-hmm. So you, that fits right along with what you were saying about how you help fit those puzzle pieces together. It's almost kind of being a tax strategist too, right? Because especially with the type of clients you work with, you got to figure out how to mitigate those tax liabilities, right?
Yeah. So the best way I describe it to folks is that normally with a lot of financial advisors, you sit down and you're kind of looking at what did the investments that they're doing, what kind of return did I get on those? Mm-hmm. And so while that fact is important, what we often skip over is what is the actual net return after taxes, right? Because that's the real money in your pocket, right? Mm-hmm. And so not only does it involve the investments, but it involves the plan. Yeah. And so when you're talking about, for example, someone selling a business coming up, and when you sell a business, you may have put some money into that business, and you don't have to repay taxes on that money when you sell it, but then you sell it hopefully above that profit, number, for a profit from what you put into it, and you got to pay taxes on what's in between. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times people don't know that, hey, if you've got another investment account, and we can do things called like tax loss harvesting and things like that, where we kind of create these almost fictitious losses for a tax return. When you go sell that business, all of a sudden you're not paying as much in taxes because it'll offset each other. They're both the same type of tax, so one can offset the other. And so I've had clients come in, and we've, especially over the last few years where the markets haven't been as good, being able to kind of do this tax loss harvesting strategy. They sell their business or sell some real estate that they have or whatnot, and surprisingly, they actually end up with more money in their pocket than what they thought they were going to have. Yeah. And so to us, it's more about the strategy of how do we actually impact your bottom line, not just the return that makes us look good. Yeah. And so, like you said, it's those puzzle pieces, putting it together, figuring out from a tax standpoint, from a planning standpoint, how do all these things integrate and work together ultimately to get you to that picture you want it to look like.
Yeah. So you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, probably some executives as well. Yep. What would be your number one piece of advice for business owners, entrepreneurs? Other than just like, hey, call me, what's your number one piece of advice to those people? Because, your role is very important to a business owner or an entrepreneur, because at some point, you build a business to sell it or pass it down to your family. So at some point, it's going to be changing hands, and you're going to have a tax liability on it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, there's many things I could say that would probably be up there as far as my number one. But, generally speaking, I think, early on, you don't talk to anyone and their accountant that'll tell you that it was smooth the whole way, right? Kind of look at all the years. There's probably some years in the red, some good years. But being able to hang on through that is important, and really listening to, your mentors, your advisors, and everybody else that's been there, done that. Yeah. Advise people through it. To help you kind of get through those tougher times, because they're definitely going to be there. It's a part of business. It's a part of the way that it works. Mm-hmm. And obviously good learning opportunities through that. But as you kind of progress through that, like you mentioned, at some point this business is going to trade hands. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what I run into is people don't think about that trading of hands, or even if they thought about it, they don't really discuss it until it's time. and that's kind of too late.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to delay things pretty far. And so, I encourage people, start thinking about it as early as possible. It's not that you have to do anything, but you want to think about it. You want to have those conversations of where you would like it to go, and that might change over time. But depending on your thoughts and what you want to do about it, really will have an impact on how you run your business and structure your business going forward. And so always tell people to be thinking about it ahead of time, what you want to happen. And then especially if it's not a family sale, if it's going to be an external sale, I always tell people, hey, the best thing you can do is always be ready. You never know when there's going to be an offer made. And the best time to sell is when it's at its peak. A lot of business owners hang on too long. And when you hang on too long, you get tired. The revenue starts to go down. You're not worth as much. And then you're in a bad spot when it comes to sell. So get yourself, always be ready to sell, even though you may not be willing to sell. And you'll know when it's time, when the best offer comes.
Yeah, that's really good advice, actually. And that's something I've looked at with gym ownership. I love what I do, and I think I will for a very long time. But I've told multiple people around me, like, guys, you see me getting burned out. If you see me not enjoying what I'm doing, tell me, because that's probably the time to sell, so that I can pass the baton of successful business on rather than a dying business. And I've seen that in CrossFit gyms, just because I've been looking at that recently. That happens a lot. I mean, there's been a lot of gyms that have changed hands recently, and usually it's when they're dying, not when they're flourishing. And that's, as you said, that's usually the time to sell. That's when you're going to actually be able to make a profit. You're going to be able to, but as long as you love what you do, don't ever worry about it. Just keep doing it.
It might be 1 or 2 years before you thought you were going to sell.
Right.
That's the time. Maximize that value while you can.
So, as a tax write-off, this is going to be a fun question here. What is the number one thing you see business owners buy as a tax write-off?
Well,
there's one thing I'm thinking of in particular, but I just see what I see driving around, not. So I'm curious what you see.
Yeah, I guess I'm not, completely qualified to answer that question, since I'm not kind of the tax professional.
Okay, gotcha.
In that, and so I don't see a lot of what the write-offs are for these businesses and whatnot. But in going through financial plans with folks and seeing some of the assets that they have and whatnot, and I've got some clients down in Alabama and some more rural areas as well. And, how they actually structure their write-offs and whatnot, I don't know. But it's fun to see. I got a lot of clients that are interested in farming. They have this really unique business over here on one side, and then their downtime is spent on this big farm that they have. And all of them do all kinds of different things. I've had clients have Christmas tree farms to cattle to you name it. But you always ask, okay, how much money does the farm make? And it's pretty much always zero.
Breaking even.
And it's more of a hobby than anything. And sometimes it's such a hobby that it's actually a loss.
Really?
And so that's okay, because it is a business. It kind of flows into everything else.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I'm not exactly sure what from their core business what they're writing off the most. But I'm sure there's many things that they're trying, and the CPA saying yay or nay, most likely nay on a lot of it.
Oh man, G-Wagons, guys. That's why we see so many G-Wagons out there. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, cool. So let's take it back a little bit here. Tell us about your family.
Yeah. So married with 4 kids. Kind of unique story with my family. Of the 4, one is biological. 3 are inherited through the marriage. Okay. Wife was married to a Marine, and the Marine had a service-connected death.
Oh man!
And so left her and the 3 kids. I met her after that. The rest is history as far as that goes. But but now they're my own kids, and coaching the 12-year-olds baseball team, showing up to as many softball games. We got a swimmer, softball player, volleyball. You name it, we're everywhere.
That's
and
awesome.
So wife kind of holds it down. I'm traveling a lot. Actually, she was out of town this week, so I was the one trying to hold it down, and don't do it as well as her. But
none of us do, my friend.
No. So that's kind of the season of life we're in right now. 15, 14, 12, and 4. And so so it's a lot of fun trying to, even though we're constantly tired, and whatnot, it's like everybody says, when it's all said and done and you no longer have the kids in the house, you're going to wish you still had it. And so trying to cherish it while we can, even though it's costing us a lot in gas and everything else.
Man, that's so Alexa and Wiley are both in that season right now. Alexa's, she'll be 11 this month, and then Wiley's 7. He just started playing rugby, and I got roped into helping coach, and I love it. It's so much fun to be there, and we're teaching them about commitment, because of course there's those days where they're like, I don't want to go to rugby, or I don't want to go to baseball, and it's like, well, okay, this is a learning lesson here. So but yeah, you're running around constantly every day, every night, you're doing something, and then with multiple businesses too, you're already running 100 miles an hour as it is. So but it's you learn to appreciate it, because you're right, it's not going to be here in 10 years. I mean, they'll be able to drive themselves. Alexa will be able to drive herself in another 5 years. That's scary, Yeah,
it's very, very scary.
When you look at how much time you have them in the house, I've thought about this with my daughters. 8 more years or 7 more years at this point. She's gone, or at least she's, hopefully being an adult, which is awesome. But, we won't have those dinner every night, having dinner together at the table, or running around to sports, or, being lacking sleep because you don't get the kids to bed until 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then you get to bed late and have to be up early. It's a great season of life to be in.
We'll have to find a new hobby at that point in time. Right now it's baseball games and softball games, volleyball, swimming, and taxi driving.
Taxi driving. That's what they don't tell you as a parent, is you're going to be a taxi driver. Right. So tell us about where you grew up and a little bit about your upbringing. All that.
So for kind of split time between, grew up in my, kindergarten, preschool through 6th grade, kind of in the Lawrence area here. And, moved to several different places in Lawrence. And then from between 6th and 7th grade, that summer moved actually more into the inner city.
Okay.
I'd say my parents definitely struggled financially as a kid, and that's part of what led me to do what I do today. And it was certainly, I imagine, thinking back on it, that it was even more of a challenge than what I even realized. I knew, you've got friends, whose families do really well, and the difference as a kid. You just may not feel the full effects of it. And so that's one thing I think my parents did a really good job of, is even though we struggled financially, they never, really made me feel that way. Right. And so, I mean, I've had everything that everyone else had. We certainly had a lot of tough situations. One of the places we live in an apartment, and it was being torn down.
Oh, really?
And all the buildings were torn down, and ours was the last one standing.
Man.
I think we were maybe even the last or second to last people in the building left. Still didn't know where we were going to go. And so experiences like that were definitely, unique and tough to as a kid, just to kind of understand and see what your parents are going through. And eventually got moved and out of there and whatnot, and into a few other places and whatnot. And so, it was different. It was tough. A lot of tough lessons, especially when we moved into the inner city. It was certainly a whole new challenge. New friends, new schools, a lot tougher schools. And so it's just a much different experience in those schools.
Much different environment.
Different environment. The biggest challenge, I think, in entering the schools in IPS was just the fact that not too many classrooms were just full of kids there to learn.
Right. They're there because they have to be, or they're getting food. I mean, my mom taught at IPS for 35 years, and she told me, some of these kids, the only time they would eat is when they came to school.
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, it's tough.
Much different lifestyle down there.
Yeah, very, very, very tough. And so my mom worked really, really hard to, IPS does have some, back when I'm not sure what all they have now, but back when I was there, that, you kind of had your core core classes that kids went into, and then you had what they called their magnet programs.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
accelerated.
So I got into there, and Mom really pushed for me to get into the magnet program, and that certainly helped. Many more of those kids were much more interested in learning that were in that, and so that certainly helped me with my education path, and whatnot. And then actually ended up making my way to a school in Muncie. Lived here in Indianapolis, but it's a school called the Indiana Academy.
Huh.
You live in a dorm there in Muncie. It's right on Ball State's campus.
Oh, that's cool. Is it
and
still around today?
Yep, still around today.
Interesting.
It's technically a public school.
Yeah.
When I went, it was fully public in the sense that you didn't pay tuition or room and board.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's changed a little bit now. I think tuition's covered, but you have to cover some room and board cost.
Okay.
I think is the way that it works.
Yeah.
But I went there. It's just your junior and senior year.
Okay.
And that was complete shock going into that. Going from IPS high school, where, to be honest, at that level, in those high schools, it was pretty easy. You know, I felt like doing good academically, and what can go wrong? This is pretty easy. And so got the opportunity through a friend to go visit the school. And when I went there, I was like, yeah, I'm interested. I want to do that. So kind of went through the process, eventually got accepted, and found out, there's some kids that are really, really smart out there.
That's awesome.
And so it was a good experience for me. It's one of those experiences where you hate it the whole way through, and then you get done and you're like, it's probably worth it. It's kind of tough going through it, but really challenged you. Made, especially the first year of college, kind of like, this is actually easy compared to that.
Yeah.
So teachers were fabulous. Just a completely different experience than what most people get in high school. And so that really kind of set the stage for me to kind of know what it's like to have to critically think really, really hard, because they challenge you so hard on that. Really worked you academically, way past than what you ever thought you would have to in high school. Writing long papers on things like Shakespeare, what does love mean in this particular Shakespeare play, writing 10-page papers on that sort of thing, and things like that, where you really got to sit down and think through things. And so it was a challenge for sure through there, but it's kind of, through the upbringing and the education part, it was kind of up and down, right? It was 1st through 6th grade, pretty standard, didn't have much, but education was good.
Yeah.
Then education went downhill pretty quickly from there. And then shot right back up, which I think was a big help. It was a good decision to go.
Yeah. So what's your view on education? Because, like personally, I didn't do well in school, and I kind of pursued an alternate route going in, through college. I went to vocational school first, and then went to a real college, and then, which my friends still didn't call it real college. I was like, oh, okay. And then ended up dropping out, about a year into traditional college, because I was learning more in the industry that I was in. What's your take on education? Like, what do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, of course, going through school, you've got to have the basics. You got to be able to read, write, do math, and depending on what you're ultimately going to do will kind of dictate the level of education you need in those core competencies, right? And so not everybody needs Calc AB, right, for the rest of their life. But going through school, I think the most important thing that you can do is really learn to be a problem solver, learn to critically think, learn how to educate yourself, instead of completely relying on this is what the teacher said. I'll never forget one of those classes at the academy I had. We went into class one day, and the teacher just started teaching. And as he was teaching, we're going, and everybody just started looking at each other like, what is he talking about? And so finally somebody raised their hand and said, hey, you had us read these this in the textbook, and what you're saying is not what it says in the textbook. And he said, finally. He was like, I was going to stand up here and tell you guys all the wrong stuff until somebody called it out. He's like,
that's awesome.
He's like, you guys got to learn to read for yourself, educate yourself, and then we're going to have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
And so, that taught me right away, like, he's right. If I just stand up there and if I just sit there and listen, and without really understanding or challenging and questioning, then I'm not really educating myself. I'm just taking in some verbiage, trying to memorize it and acing a test.
Yeah.
And so really taught me that, like, okay, you got to be a critical thinker. You got to think, problem solve, learn on your own, and then begin to ask questions from there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important process. And I think as you go through that process of learning to do those things, then you begin to figure out, what are your interests and what are your talents. And that's where you get into the kind of the debate of education and, college, vocational school, all these sorts of things. I mean, being a financial advisor, I see people successful in all kinds of different areas. Some require schooling, some just vocational school. It's all over the board.
Yeah.
There's not to be successful within a career doesn't require one education through traditional college or vocational school or whatnot. And so it's more about what are your talents, what are your interests, what can you go do with your career that's going to be motivating every day. And so once you can kind of find what that passion is, and you've learned to be a problem solver, critical thinker, and be someone wanting to learn, then you can be good at any of those, whatever is going to drive that passion. And so I think that should then dictate what ultimately you go education wise.
Yeah.
And so the trick is we're asked to do that at such a young age, to try to figure that out. And sometimes some people have that figured out and some don't, right? And so if you don't have it figured out, it just means your path might deviate. It might take you a little longer to get there. But the thing would be to stay focused on it and try to get there and figure out what those passions are, and then get the right education to meet those passions.
Yeah.
So
I think that, I really think that coming from a traditional school system, people need to spend a couple of years before they go to college doing something like go serve the military, go into Greenpeace, do something service related that gets you away from home, that gets you out in the world, that utilizes you for good, and then decide, okay, what now that I've done all these, I've had these life experiences, now what do I want to do with life? But we're so pushed to go choose, exactly as you said, like at 18 years old, what do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know. I didn't know. I mean, I went down to Nashville for music, okay? I got down there within 3 months. I'm like, this is not what I thought it was. I don't really want to be down here. Now, looking back on it, I should have gone to Belmont instead of going to a vocational college if I wanted to pursue music more. It would have made it easier to break into that industry. But, I went the route of, okay, well, I don't like traditional school, but I need to do something while I'm down here trying to get into music. I was studying guitar with a professor down there, and I'm like, okay, so I went to a diesel technology school, and I enjoyed it, but, then I started getting told I can make this money, and I'm like, well, why aren't you guys doing that then, And so I think, like, if I had just gone, okay, maybe I'll join the military for a few years, get some experience. So, well, then my college would have been paid for, right? So that's a pretty cool thing. I would have served my country. I would have done something purposeful with my life. I wouldn't go back and change it now because I wouldn't have met my beautiful wife, have my awesome kids, but like looking at that, as my kids grow older, it's like, hey, you don't have to choose what you want to do right now. Go get some life experience first. I'd love to see him join the military, go do something service related, and then come back and go, okay, I want to do this. I'm going to go to school for it, right? Rather than going to school, partying for 5 years, and then still coming out and really not even using your degree. It's like, what did you even spend money on? So I think that the education system itself really needs to be revamped, especially because it was designed around creating more factory workers and keeping those kids occupied while their parents were at the factory. And the modern day factory is just your basic 9-to-5 employee job, and people need to ask questions, like you said too. Like, don't just take what you're hearing for education. No, ask questions about it. I mean, that's we're putting our kids into. We're homeschooling next year, and the cool thing about the education model we're choosing is it has a trivium model. Lindsay Pattison on episode 2, guys, she kind of described this with the school they're starting out in New Hampshire, and it's let's see, grammar, rhetoric, and then what was the other one, Braden? Grammar, rhetoric. something else. But essentially, it teaches them to memorize. Then it teaches them to come up with their own logic, and then it teaches them to verbalize that, right? And yeah, sorry, Lindsay, I forgot what you told me now. But that kind of model, it teaches them to ask questions and be genuinely curious rather than just regurgitating what they've been told to memorize onto a piece of paper, right?
Yeah, it doesn't help you when you actually get out into the real world. It doesn't help you with much if you're just memorizing facts and putting it down, and so you might be really good at trivia on Thursday nights, but when it comes to actually doing a job or being creative or trying to figure things out,
solve problems,
problems, it doesn't help. And no matter what industry you're in, you end up being a problem solver.
Exactly. So, everybody ends up being a problem solver, a salesperson, and I don't even know if you end up being it. I mean, those are pretty much what everybody ends up being at some point, Yeah,
for sure.
That's cool. So, who was the most influential person on your development growing up, or even into manhood too?
Yeah. So, I'd say several people, but I would say definitely my dad. Played a huge role in that. He, especially when you don't grow up with much, you're constantly just trying to figure things out. And so that played a huge role. My dad had a certain upbringing that, was also a lot more tough, a lot of tough love in there. And so, and his dad, my grandpa, was actually, I'd say, a pretty big influence. I guess good timing on this too, as far as talking about that, because we actually just lost him not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before that.
Oh man!
And so, so it was a good time to obviously reflect on that relationship and who he was and what he meant to me and family and others. And so,
was he able to be very present around your kids too, and be around a lot?
Yeah, he especially I guess not as much as you'd like, because certainly in later in life he was 87, and so the youngest being the 4-year-old, and long life, but once you get out of that old, sometimes there's trouble getting around and whatnot. So it was more us getting to him, type of thing. But as I was a kid, he was constantly at baseball games and vacations. Him and my grandma were always taking us somewhere. Had me and my cousins, had cousins that lived in Ohio, and then one here. Constantly have us once a week or once a week for the summer, every summer over to their house to hang out.
So family was very important to him.
Yeah, it's very, very important. And so that's you think about how I perceive family and whatnot. A lot of that definitely comes from him. He was just that guy that's just, you kind of think about that mainstay in a family that's just always there. Like, you feel like you didn't even pick up the phone, he just somehow is already there, right? And that was definitely him. And so always there. He had a lot of at the funeral, a lot of people from his church there, church that he actually founded.
Oh, that's awesome. Which church was it?
It was called Agape Christian Church.
Oh, I've heard of that. It's still open, right?
Still open, barely hanging on.
Okay. Where is it?
So it's over. So they actually sold their land and property a few years ago.
Okay.
I think they're maybe looking at a new place now, but not sure of all the details around that. But it's an aging congregation. But him and some other people had founded that church.
Yeah.
And
well, young people, if you're in the area, go hit up Agape Christian Church.
Yeah, definitely. The pastor is fantastic. Known him for many, many years. But they had a lot of people from the church come and talk about what he meant to the church and so on and so forth. And it's just, again, like whether it was family or the church or whatnot, he was just the guy that was just always there. Back when I was a kid, the church actually had a extremely huge amount of property. And so, upkeep of property can be a task. And so they had this large tractor that they would use to mow the grass. And, that's how I learned to ride a tractor. Got up on the tractor with Grandpa and did that in the summer times with him. And so just, stuff like that. He was also a carpenter. That's what he did in his free time. And so his day job was was pretty unique and interesting. Wish I had the talent that he had.
Yeah.
But he worked for Naval Avionics to start out with, which became Raytheon later on. But basically, he was a master welder.
Oh, cool. That's a really good craft.
Engineers come up with crazy designs and things for the military, and sometimes tools didn't exist to actually see to fruition those engineering ideas that they had. And he was the man behind the scenes, welding the tools and welding things together to make sure that awesome. those ideas could come to fruition.
Yeah.
So he made an entire career of that, and then in his spare time did carpentry, and he did all kinds of stuff. Built, I mean, you name it, he built it. Oftentimes my grandma painted it, and then they would go over to like craft shows and things and sell
cool.
it.
Yeah.
And what the money that they made was their travel budget, and so they traveled the world doing that.
That's awesome.
And so that was pretty cool, pretty neat. So every time you need anything built, you'd go over there. He had a big shop in his garage. Grandpa would help you build it. He built my loft that I had in high school and college, and so pretty neat. So yeah, just learning from him, was definitely a big influence on me.
Yeah.
He wasn't a man of a lot of words, but if you sat down with him long enough, he couldn't help but tell you exactly what he thought.
Sure.
And sometimes it was just purely wisdom based. Like he knows, it's almost like he knew, I only get so much time with you, so I'm going to tell you this.
Yeah.
And, I remember, it's things like one day we were sitting down, I think we were just having some lunch, and you were just sitting down and he just said, hey, Dustin, if you ever find yourself with a family and you lose your job, he goes, I want you to understand something. He said, if that happens, you get up in the morning and you shower, you put on a suit and you leave the house. He said, and you do not come home until you have a job. I was like, yes, Grandpa.
Yes, Grandpa.
And so
that's awesome.
He would constantly put in things like that into you. They him and my grandma had a unique thing as well, where when it came time for driver's ed, it was like $400 or so to do driver's ed, and they said, hey, we're going to give you $400 for driver's ed. The catch is you got to pay it back, and you're 15.
Yeah.
Hadn't had a job yet.
Right.
Just want to get driver's ed and drive, right?
That's a good way to do it.
And so they gave it to me, said, hey, you got to pay it back. I said, okay. So I did my driver's ed, got a summer job, got the money together, went to go pay him back. When I went to go pay him back, they said, no, actually, you keep it, but now we know if you ever come to us, you're good for it.
That's awesome.
I was like,
that
okay.
Is cool.
So it's like lesson after lesson.
Yeah.
They didn't never, like I said, never really had a ton of words. It's just a lot of action, right, that really taught you a lot. And so between my grandpa and those things that he instilled in my dad and the work ethic, my dad was one of those guys, if he slept past 9, he's knocking on the bedroom door like, nope, not happening.
Good.
And so, so just kind of just the general, work ethic was a big thing in the family. And so, he was, both of them were definitely huge influences for me.
Speaking of driver's ed, this little rabbit hole, I just learned something today that in Germany, they actually charge you $2,500 to do your driver's ed and get your license. And then it's something like a 2-year time span of going through driver's ed.
Wow.
Like they take it super seriously over there, probably because of the Autobahn.
Yeah.
You're able to go as fast as you want on that thing. I just thought that was kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
Obviously, I think we need to do something differently here in America because we have a lot of dipshit drivers out there. Like people, and then they got their phones on their faces too, so that just makes it even worse. But another conversation for another time.
Yeah. My daughter's in driver's ed right now. And
is she?
The thing that I don't understand about it is you pay, I think the cost was about the same as what it was when I was a kid, but when I was a kid and you went and you did it, all the required hours were all done by the teacher.
Okay.
And now I think it's something along the lines of we have to teach her like 40 hours and then maybe like 10 hours or so is actually done with the instructor. And I'm like,
so what are we paying for?
Yeah, what am I paying for? The online class that she did, or I did it in person.
Right.
So I'm not quite understanding how all that adds up, but kind of, it's like, well, I'm happy to teach her, but if there's
they want you involved in teaching your kids how to drive, they don't want
right.
you involved in teaching your kids education, right?
Yeah. Or maybe the insurance costs went too much to do that many hours with the kids or something. I don't know.
Oh man.
But so
you gonna make your daughter pay back the $400 or whatever it is now?
Hasn't been the plan. trying to figure out how and when to instill certain work ethic and things into them is definitely a challenge these days.
Yeah. Well, and especially because they're coming from more than you did, right?
Yeah,
which is ultimately the goal. That's not a bad thing, but that's always a tough balance. Is to like, okay, well, I want to give my kids what I didn't have, but then we see the flip side of that, right? Then a kid gets spoiled, and then then they have a horrible work ethic. They're too soft, They don't know how to do anything on their own. I've got a couple of friends like that. I won't name names, but it's just like you had too much growing up, right? And it's like ultimately, like I want to give you a lot, but not. I'm going to make you work for it too, right?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, and trying to figure out exactly how much to give them, because it's not necessarily even just giving them. It kind of comes with the territory as far as, if you've earned a certain way of life, they're going to naturally benefit from some of that.
Right. But you want them to earn that.
But you want them to earn it
too.
Along the way.
Yeah.
And so
you don't want it to be a trust fund kid.
Yeah. For me, it's more about, I guess, the opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. So, my parents had very few avenues of opportunity to give me, which just made it a little bit harder to make my way.
Yeah.
Right. And so, my thought process has always been, well, I just want to make sure that, they have all the opportunity. If they look back on their lives, the one thing they can't look back and say is, I didn't have the opportunities in front of me to take advantage of.
Give them the opportunity, but still instill the work ethic. It's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine. I was like, I want to build these businesses so that I can eventually pass them down one day to my kids, so that they don't have to struggle the same way I did, and have to grind to build something, And then he looked at me. He goes, "That's not what you want." He goes, "Not from you, no." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right." I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute. I do want them to struggle. I do. I want them to have controlled adversity, right? So like, I don't want them to necessarily go through some of the adversity I went through, in the same ways, but I want them to have controlled adversity as to, they know that life's not just handed to them on a silver platter. And I want to push them to have a work ethic. And, but what I want to do is I want to set them up better than I was set up. So like you said, they have more opportunity, or they have more guidance. I probably would, have $100,000 more in my pocket if I hadn't pissed as much money away on trucks as I did growing up,
Right.
And it's like, those are lessons that now I can teach them, how to manage their money. Like my daughter, she when we had the whole Dogecoin pop, right? I was like, "Hey, how much money you have?" She's like, $40. I'm like, "Okay, cool. Well, do you want to invest your $40? She's like, "Well, what do you mean?" We start talking through it, and I explain it to her, and I'm like, "If we put your $40 in, it'll grow, especially right now." And so with my money that I invested, I put her $40 in, and she was 9 years old and had $1,400 at the end of that Dogecoin pop off $40. And now she sees the value of not spending that money, but investing it or doing something smart with it. And I'll tell you, man, her little mind is incredible to watch. She's been trying to, like, her and her friends have been doing lemonade stands, finding ways to make some money here and there so that they can go buy goats. I'm like, "Well, where are you going to put that goat?" And she's like, "Our backyard." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know about that." I'm like, "How are you going to feed that goat?" And then she has to start, it's cool to let their, like, see their wheels turning on all that stuff.
Yeah. Very educational for
them.
them.
But it's, you want them set up well. You don't want to just hand it to them.
Yeah. It's definitely a fine line and a balance to try to figure out. And I guess it's a fine line and balance that, generations before us have been trying to figure out as well. And so it's not new to us as parents trying to figure that out. But trying to figure out how to have opportunity, but learn the lessons that struggle can give you, and be motivated.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to, the education and what you want to do with your life, being motivated towards something and figuring out how to have some work ethic to get there, and some heart and desire to go with it, and be able to take the bumps and bruises along the way.
Right.
And I kind of feel like my job as the parent is just to be able to open the doors to go be able to go down that path in the first place,
right,
and have more opportunities of paths to choose from, and so
and more guidance,
some guidance along the way, and knowing more successful people that I can say, "Hey, go talk to this person." I know nothing about what it is that you're interested in, but I know someone.
It takes a village, right? And that's what one of the things I love about our gym community is, I see my son come in, my daughter come in, and they, they play around with the other members, and they're going to learn life lessons from those other members too, and that's what's cool. The other people in here, we have this community around us that, I'm going to have an influence on their kids in some manner. They're going to have an influence on my kids in some manner, and that's why it's important to surround yourself with good people, right? People. I've always tried to put myself around people that I thought were better than me to elevate myself, and
Right.
And I mean, it's worked pretty well, and that's you become the top 5 people you hang around. Like that's, and there's statistically that's actually been proven that kids. Let me think here. I'm not going to get this exactly right, but kids are more influenced by their friends and their friends' parents than they are their own parents. And it doesn't matter how much money they come from, but more so who they're around that sets them up for success. And then you think, okay, well, there's, it takes people having adversity and having a rough life and having a chip on their shoulder to be successful. And that's not necessarily it either.
Right.
There's some very successful people that became successful from having a chip on their shoulder.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, that ends up fizzling out at some point, right?
Yeah.
So, and I guess that question is, can you be super worldly successful, right? And do that without having a chip on your shoulder?
Yeah, I think that I guess most people think that having a chip on your shoulder comes from a poor upbringing, right? And, I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah.
I came from a poor upbringing, but I don't necessarily think, that the chip on my shoulder comes from that.
Poor financially, though.
Poor financially, yeah. I don't think it comes from that. It's not like, hey, I was poor financially, and so because we grew up that way, that's my reason, right? And so I don't think it doesn't have, for some people it might be that way, but I don't think it has to be that way. I feel like the chip on the shoulder really just, I kind of think of someone like give any athlete really that maybe had, since I'm a big baseball guy, I use King Griffey Jr. for an example.
Yeah.
His dad was a professional baseball player. That guy played with a chip on his shoulder, was one of the best players to ever play.
Yeah.
But you can't say that it was his upbringing of any sort that gave him a chip on his shoulder to play as hard as he did, to practice as hard as he did, because there's no way you get to where he did without a lot of dedication and effort and so on and so forth. So nobody can say he didn't have a chip on his shoulder, or a guy like Kobe Bryant. He didn't have a bad upbringing at all.
Right.
And obviously, his Mamba mentality's world renowned now. And so it can come. I guess it just has to come from somewhere within, right? It goes back to that passion, that desire, finding something that you're really passionate and desire about. And
I think when you redefine success too, and take it away from this worldly view of success of, Rolexes and Ferraris and big houses. I mean, those things are not bad. Let's make that clear. Those aren't bad. But what becomes bad is when that's what people are seeking out, and that's what they find as success.
Yeah.
The success comes if you do what you love and you have balance in your life. And I know some people preach against balance too, and you gotta put your family second in order to get to where you need to be, and if they're not willing to support that, then find a new family. It's like, no, it's not, because at the end of the day, when you're sitting on your deathbed, those people are going to be the only ones there, especially if you're the way you are, and even then they may not show up. And that's I think when we shift that mindset of what's on my resume versus am I doing what I love, and then really what's on your obituary. Like, what are people going to say about you when you're gone? What was the impact you had on others when you're gone?
Right.
You can't do that when you're self-seeking versus doing something you're passionate about, because usually what you're passionate about serves other people in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that you kind of as you kind of work through that process of what's your passion, what are you going to do, and you're trying to be successful in however you're going to define it. Even if you start out thinking that success is going to be defined by getting that worldly item, what ends up happening is that you learn that the successes really were just the day-to-day successes.
Yeah.
It's, constantly trying to preach to one of my daughters right now that, it's more about the journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the result at the end will be there, but oftentimes if you're competing or whatever you're trying to do, say you're competing in a swim meet, you win the race. Well, guess what? The feeling of that win only lasts for so long,
mm-hmm.
but the journey that it took to get there will kind of last forever.
Yeah.
And you'll always remember that. You'll always know what that felt like, mm-hmm. all the work that you put into that. But the feeling of that win just it comes and goes pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is if you're doing things for the result, not the journey, as you said, it goes quickly. So it's not a sustainable high. You know, when you're doing it for the journey, that you can only do that if you're truly passionate about something or you truly enjoy what you're doing. You know, and not everybody's going to be in love with what they do, but if you can find something that you can attach yourself to, like if you're passionate about serving other people, you can do that through anything, mm-hmm. right? If you're passionate about educating people, you can do that through almost any career path and be a trainer in some way, shape, or form. You know, that's a good definition of what success is, I think. You know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, what was one thing your dad would do that you still remember to this day that was super meaningful to you as a kid that made you go, man, my dad's got my back, or my dad, he's around all the time? I think that's something that we forget as fathers, like being around for our kids or mm-hmm. being present for them, even if we can't necessarily be around physically, being present for them. What was something your dad did that made you feel that?
Yeah, I guess a number of things, but one thing that stuck out, I guess, throughout the years is we lived probably it was probably about a 10-minute jog to the park down the road, mm-hmm. and the park down the road had kind of a little small, not a large, but a small wooded area back there, mm-hmm. and so one of the things that my dad and I would do every so often was we would just go for a run. We'd jog down to the park. We'd kind of go back into the wooded area. There's one particular log that was just always there from fallen tree. Yeah. And we'd sit on that log and we'd sit down and my dad would pray with me, and then we'd jog back and go home. And so just that little bit of time, and hearing my dad pray and what he would pray about and things like that was definitely huge, because mm-hmm. it's just that one-on-one time. You're not talking even anything that took hours and hours. Mm-hmm. It was just a 15-minute jog, maybe a 10-minute prayer, mm-hmm. and a 15-minute jog back home. And so that was definitely really meaningful. I know that I was really young and I didn't know, but he's told me the stories about one job that he had that was just crazy demanding, but it was could have been super fruitful, mm-hmm. From an income standpoint. But that job was causing him to kind of get into the evenings a little bit more so than what he wanted.
Take away from the family.
Yeah, right about the time that I was starting T-ball. And mm-hmm. so starting to miss those types of things. Yeah. And so he kind of hung that up and started over, essentially.
He sacrificed the worldly success to have success with his family.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
That's big.
So that was, hearing about those things and just kind of those key moments, I think were huge growing up for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a big deal. Because most men would not do that. It's hard to. I've had a hard time doing that, putting down worldly success to spend more time with the family. And it doesn't mean you're not going to be successful. It just means, okay, maybe that's the wait, or has to, or maybe I choose a different path.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, when I focused on my family and my faith first, life got really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't mean you don't go through hardship, but it gets really good. So you're an entrepreneur too. You've got, I guess financial advising technically is, in a way, entrepreneurship. Yeah. You may work for a company, but you're still building your own business and your own book of business. But you're also an entrepreneur outside of that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, kind of more of a hobby, so to speak, I would say.
Not a full-blown business yet.
No. And whether it becomes one or not, I guess it's kind of beside the point.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess a lot of big businesses kind of start that way, but not really looking necessarily for it to be a business, so to speak. Kind of just looking more of something me and my friends enjoy.
Yeah.
And so had an opportunity through a cigar club that I belong to that, the cigar industry is kind of it's a very, very tight-knit group.
Yeah.
And they don't like a lot of outsiders. And so, anybody that's tried to break into the cigar business is keenly aware of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of family-owned businesses, and it's just they're very welcoming people, but don't necessarily want you stomping on their territory,
right?
In a lot of cases, and so it's just a close-knit community. But so through this cigar club that I belong to, that had built up a really good reputation with many in the cigar world, kind of gave us this opportunity to kind of create a cigar brand, really. And so we kind of started off on that, and like I said, it's been a kind of a fun hobby, because of what the owner of the club has done. He's been able to really establish a lot of relationships with factories and cigar blenders and things like that. And so these guys get really excited. Normally when you go to a cigar shop and you look at the selection is mostly consists of cigars that can be put out on a regular basis. And so to do that, the farm and the factory has to be able to really be sure that they can produce enough of a certain type of tobacco on a regular enough basis to have enough production for this cigar blend on a regular basis. And so, like anything else, you do that enough, you're like, as someone that's a tobacco grower, they might say, well, that's good for all this, but we've got all these other things that I could do, but I just can't grow enough of it to make a product that's ongoing and based. So they have these passion projects that they want to do, but there's really no market for it necessarily. And so so what we've been able to do, and through the club, is been able to get our hands on some of these passion projects that a lot of these blenders and growers have, and get to know them and what they do and what makes their stuff special. And so through that you get samples and the whole 9 yards. It's kind of a fun process.
That's awesome.
To go through.
Gotta smoke a lot of cigars, don't you?
create our our labels and our brand.
Yeah,
it's a lot harder than what people would think to do, but we get it done, and it's just kind of a fun thing to do. And talk with the friends about coming up with names and what it's going to look like. And so,
do you guys have a name for it yet?
So Winter Circle.
Winter Circle.
The whole idea is there's been several kind of brands created out of this club called Pravada Cigar Club, and the club itself kind of put this out to a lot of its members to be able to do. And so a handful of members said, yep, we want to participate this and do this. So the whole idea in the beginning is they kind of labeled it, regional groups type of thing. And so you had these regional groups participating, got some in Texas and some really all across the country participating in this with their own cigar labels, the whole 9 yards. And so we're fortunate to be able to do that and be involved in that and be one of those. Where normally getting our hands on these cigars from a lot of these factories and blenders would be impossible otherwise, or would take years and a lot more money than what we've put into it. Yeah. And so so it's been fun. Winter Circle. So since it was a regional group, that's how we kind of came up with the name. We're like, well, we're all from Indianapolis here, so let's try to come up with a name that kind of rings true in Indianapolis. And so
Indy 500 coming up.
Indy 500's coming up, so kind of came up with the name Winter Circle. And as we were thinking about it, the Winter Circle kind of started to become even more than that as we were really thinking about the name and whatnot, because cigars are, typically, if you're not a regular cigar smoker, it's usually a celebration. people talk about victory cigars and things like that. And so, start thinking about the name Winter Circle and really what that means at the end of the day. And kind of the play on the Winter Circle name is the fact that, all of us at the, end of a day, month, week, or whatnot, really sit in the winner circle.
Yeah.
And so we all have our challenges every day, every week, every month. And whether they're big or small, it's a win, right? You're still here, you're still chucking along. So whatever it is, celebrate it, cherish it. And so that's why we end up sticking with the name Winner Circle.
Love it. That's a cool project to be a part of.
Yeah, it's fun. It's just something to you get to do with your buddies.
Yeah.
And so get to do that. Since my wife was a Marine widow, she's been a part of working with an organization called Folds of Honor. And so one of the cigars that we did was to support that organization as well. And so we put that out, and sales from that proceeds are going to Folds of Honor.
Really cool.
And so we've been doing that, and so just kind of fun. It's just stuff where some guys get together and. Like I said, it's just a hobby,
have
right?
a drink and smoke some cigars. Hard work.
Just have fun,
Tough work, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah. So, somebody's got to do it. Yep. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah. Well, at some point we'll have to do like a podcast interview with some cigars and or a podcast chat and cigars and some good whiskey. Speaking of, have you ever had any Hard Truth whiskey before?
Yeah.
So Bloomington, we can have like real rye whiskey. I don't know what bill they passed or whatever, but they have and I'm not paid to say this, guys. No, we're not that big yet. But no, Hard Truth whiskey, this sweet mash rye, 117 proof at Kroger. I got that the other day to just kind of celebrate a little win I had, and didn't realize it was 117 proof until I took a sip of it, and I was like, holy shit, this is strong. Yeah. It was good, but one glass, and you're like, man, tastes so good going in and then burns like hell going down. But it's good whiskey. It's good whiskey.
Yeah, I'm a big bourbon fan, and I don't know. I think that as they say that the American palate leans more towards the higher proof.
Yeah.
If you go to other countries, they like more like the 90 proof type stuff.
Okay.
And so I have to say, I guess I'm an American because I like that higher proof stuff. I guess I like the burn
like
going
that
down.
Burn, yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
At some point you'll have to create like a Winter Circle whiskey to go along with cigars too.
That'd be awesome. A lot of people think like whiskey and bourbon, they do go well with cigars, but I like trying to dip my toes and get more into coffee and cigars.
Oh, okay. That's a good little combo.
Because really, you think about cigars are synonymous with like Cuba. You can't get them here necessarily.
Yeah.
But Cuban coffee and Cuban rum are the two biggest things smoked with cigars there.
Rum and cigars would go well together.
Yeah, you'd be surprised at this. Yeah, the amount of spirits. Tequila, certain cigars. Yeah, there's it gets pretty culinary.
I become a big mezcal fan too, because it's
more
like
that smoky.
Yeah. Oh man, we had my cousin. Shout out to Emmy. She is the sommelier. I think she's a sommelier level 2, something like that, and then also is the mixologist at City House down in Nashville.
Nice.
And so we went down there and got to visit her, and I mean, like 3 drinks in, I'm pretty tipsy. And the upside is to when she knows what she's doing, she creates these concoctions. No hangover the next day. And and the first drink she gave me, she's like, "What do you like?" I'm like, "Well, I like tequila." She's like, "Okay, I got something for you." And we got to try some new things she's been working on, and I fell in love with mezcal then.
Yeah.
And there's a cheap one we got. We were hanging out with some friends the other week. I can't remember the name of it, but it has the worm. The agave worm in it. First time I bought a bottle of tequila with a worm in it, guys. Yeah, my wife said she's going to sneak it into my food at some point, so I need to get that thing gone before she does. But apparently you have some interesting experiences when you eat the worm, some mystical experiences. Probably because it's been soaking in tequila for a long time, but
yeah. Well, maybe you'll have to try it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to try to eat a worm. That's I've had nightmares about that. Worms. One of my old nightmares was I ate like salted worms or something. I'm like, Just the thought of eating worm is Raiden's over here just making like pukey faces at me. anyways, moving on. What legacy do you want to leave, Dustin?
Yeah, I guess that's a big question because it's something I've thought about a lot. Had a lot of discussions with best friends and whatnot about it. I talk about it a lot, obviously, with clients through estate planning and things like that. And for me, it's kind of multifaceted, really. At the end of the day, you've got everything from like we talked about, setting up my kids for success and what that means. I had a family friend of my dad's, tell me one time, he was just like, hey, your job is just to try to do a little better than your dad, and then your kids try to do a little better than you, and kind of perpetuate that down the family. Yeah. And, I thought that was, definitely an interesting thought and trying to figure out, what that really means to me at the end of the day. And so, I think, at the end of the day, family is so important that I do want to see, my kids be set up for the success that they want to have. And, that's
key.
That's a key
the
point.
Success they want to have.
Yeah.
Right. That means like you're not pushing them into things that you want them to do, but you're wanting them to pursue their love and passion. That's cool.
Yeah. It's obviously easier said than done.
Sure.
But trying to give them those avenues and those opportunities. And so you got to try to strike that balance as you go through life now, because when you think about, legacy strictly from the monetary standpoint, it's how much do you spend on their opportunity now versus leaving them in an estate, right? Yeah. And what do you do there? And then so you kind of try to strike that balance and constantly have that debate with clients, right? And so it's interesting getting their perspective as I'm constantly trying to think about my own life and how I want to set that up for my kids. Yeah. And then you kind of sit down and you set that up, especially coming off of my grandpa's passing. You sit there and you as you reflect on that and the life that someone like him lived, and makes you stop and think, okay, when it's my turn and I'm gone, ultimately, what does this all look like? Who's here? What are they saying? And what impact was made there? And so, I think that you've got your kids, and it almost comes down to the same thing that I talk to my kids about and try to keep their focus on, is ultimately what your legacy at the end of life should be and should look like. And what that is I tell my kids all the time, whenever things are going wrong in their life, they feel like my friends are all, I don't even know what's going on with my friends, or this is going wrong, my grades aren't good, whatever it is that's causing them frustration, that they feel like that things just aren't going right now. I just say, hey, let's just sit down and let's just talk about this, because every time if you sit down and you think things aren't going right for me, I guarantee it all boils down to your priorities aren't straight. And so we repeat it all the time, like, what's your number one priority? And for me, and what I try to instill upon them is number one, God. I said, if you're not spending time there, you're messing up right from the beginning. And so, and number two, your family, and then number three, your friends. I said, if you got all that straight in the right order, I think that you'll eliminate a lot of these problems that you're having, right? And so you think about that legacy. I kind of want that legacy really to be about that those things happen and fell in place for me, where that those priorities that I have and try to instill upon them are seen, known, respected. And I think if you have those priorities, then that kind of respect and whatnot comes with that, and ultimately the right influence. And so, I mean, for me, I'm a believer that at the end of the day, we do all these things in life. We all gotta work. We got our family and everything else. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, it's all about salvation, and who did you influence in that way, to go on their own journey and find out that is what life is all about. And so everybody's got to learn it on their own. And so being able to be a voice when people ask, when my kids, ask, being able to tell them what I know and what I don't know, and being honest about that, and ultimately showing them that those are the priorities. If you got those right, the rest of it will take care of itself, including the legacy.
That's awesome, man.
So,
well, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you.
Where can people find you or bug you about questions if they have any financial questions even? You can on LinkedIn. Dustin Mendenhall on LinkedIn, or I do have a business Facebook page, Dustin Mendenhall - financial planning consultant on there, or bug you and you know how to find me. Exactly. Yeah, I'll tell you where he lives, guys. No, I'm just kidding. Well, guys, thanks for listening in today. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that. If you haven't followed us, do that. And like the video. Appreciate you listening, and we'll talk at you later.
Thanks.
Thanks, bud.